Hi guys, welcome to my Mini-ITX gaming system build guide. This is where I'll go through each part with you, the reasons why I chose the certain part, and all the specifications of the rig. Okay, so we'll get started. I chose a Gigabyte B550i AORUS Pro AX motherboard, which has the AMD B550 chip. We've got advanced thermal design, dual PCIe 4x4 mode, M2 slots, so we can have two NVMe drives with this one. It's got Intel Wi-Fi 6, so you're running at 2.4 gigabits a second. The Ethernet port is 2.5 gigabits a second. It's got RGB Fusion 2 for light control, and Q-Flash BIOS, which is a handy little BIOS flashing feature. Now we've got a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C available, and it's also got a USB 3.2 header that will match up with the case, so you can have a front USB 3.2 Gen 2 port. Now we're going to use a discrete graphics card with this one, even though it's got onboard DisplayPort and dual HDMI ports, but they actually won't be available because in order for those to work, you need to choose a AMD Ryzen processor with a G designation, which stands for graphics, obviously. We're not using that, we're using an X processor. So that means the onboard graphics won't be available. The reason why we do that is because if you do use the G series processor, the PCI Express slot will be reduced to PCI version 3. So big drop in bandwidth there. So by using the X, we get the PCIe version 4, which has a throughput of about 14 gigabits. And also the graphics card we're using is a PCI version 4 card, so we're matching up the specs there. So we'll move on to the CPU. AMD 5600X is the one we're using, and it has some pretty good specs. So we've got 6 cores, physical cores, and 12 threads. We've got a base clock of 3.7 gigahertz and a boost clock of 4.6, so that's pretty high. L2 cache 3 megabyte, L3 is 32 megabyte. Now it only pulls 65 watt, but if you are overclocking, then it'll obviously pull more, probably up to about 120. So just allow that with the PSU. Let's see, runs on 7 nanometer process, AM4 slot, and it's unlocked for overclocking, which is obviously what we want. So I'll move on to the CPU cooler. Now originally I had just a single 120mm fan. I was just a little bit concerned it wouldn't be enough to cool, especially if you're overclocking the CPU. So I've upped it to a dual radiator fan, and that will actually get mounted in the front of the case, which I'll show you soon. So the cooler I've chosen is Corsair iCUE H100i RGB Pro XT. And we'll go down to specs for that. Let's see, PWM fan, so variable speed fan, max speed of 2400 RPM. Let's see what else. 10 to 37 dBA. Obviously supports our AM4 processor slot. And it's got RGB lighting with 16 addressable LEDs on it. Okay, so that's the cooler. We'll move on to the RAM. Now I've chosen Patriot Viper Blackout series RAM, which has some pretty good specs. I've actually got the specs on my website. Where are we here? Patriot Viper. So it's a 16 gigabyte kit I've chosen, but if you wanted to get a 32 gigabyte kit, go for it. Now running at 4400 megahertz, even though the motherboard, I think it can handle 5200 megahertz at overclocking, the price gets way up there with that sort of speed RAM. So I've sort of price point performance ratio there at 4400 megahertz. Now it's got Cast timings of 1536, which is really good for that speed RAM, and it comes with a lifetime warranty. And I think the motherboard can handle up to 64 gigabyte of RAM. Okay, so let's go on to the graphics card. Now I've chosen a Sapphire graphics card, AMD Radeon RX 6600. If you haven't heard of Sapphire, they're a really good quality brand, and I've used them in my own and systems I've built before, and they've always done really well. So we'll check out the specs on it. So RX 6600 chip, 7 nanometer process, and it supports the AMD RDNA 2 architecture. Boost clock of 2,500 megahertz and a gain clock of around 2,000 megahertz, so pretty good. 1792 stream processors, 32 megabyte cache, Ray accelerators, 28 and 8 gigabyte of GDDR6. Memory clock is 14 gigabits wide throughput, and it's got one HDMI port and 3 display ports, and they all support 8K. Alright, so pretty sick specs on this one. And of course we're matching it up with the PCI Express 4 mode there. Okay, now we'll move on to the system drive. Now I always advocate for separating your data and your system, especially with gaming machines. I mean, if you've got just a single drive, and it's always going to be your system drive that stuffs up, so you potentially lose all your private files as well, so always separate them. And I've actually got doing a guide on that on my website soon, so check that out. Now I've chosen the Samsung 980 Pro, which is pretty much the best of the best. And I've chosen 2 terabyte, but you know, that's up to you. If you think you can get away with 1 terabyte, go for it, or even 500 gigabyte. But I'd say most of you would probably be 1 terabyte. Now, in terms of specifications, let's see if I can find that. There we go. Okay, so PCI Gen 4x4 mode, NVMe, 5-year limited warranty, and it's got a 7,000 megabytes a second throughput. Now, to give you an indication of how fast that is, a standard SSD 2.5 inch drive, SATA 3, that has a 560 megabit a second throughput, whereas this has 7,000, so it's vastly faster than the standard SSD. Yeah, so let's move on to the data drive. Now I've chosen a WD Blue. Now don't be put off by the blue. It's they're actually really good drives, and you still get a 5-year warranty with them too. So in terms of spec, it's PCI Gen 3x4 mode. 2280 package, which is the same as the Samsung M2 2280. 3,500 megabits throughput. So that's pretty decent. It's plenty enough for a data drive. That's the system drive where you really need that as much throughput as you can. So we'll move on to the PSU. Now I've matched up the NZXT PSU with the case, same brand case. It's an 80 plus gold 850 watt unit, sleeved cables, 10-year warranty, and yeah, it's a really nice PSU. 850 should be plenty to handle. The card itself, the graphics card, pulls 400 watts, or requires a 400 watt PSU, plus the about 120 watt overclocking the AMD Ryzen, plus another 100 watts, so you've got a little bit of a headway there. I'll move on to the case. Now the H100i, which is the NZXT case, you've got a few colour options there. You've got black and white, you've got complete black, matte black, and then you've got the black and the red case, and that's the one I've chosen for this guide, but obviously you can choose whatever colour you like. Now the graphics card we chose is actually a dual slot card, so it takes up 2 card slots on your PC, The thing is with Mini-ITX, they only ever have one slot, so you have to be careful. You're not going to use this case. This case has allowance for a double slot GPU, so it's 44mm wide, and the actual card is 40mm wide. So if you are choosing a different case, just make sure that it handles double slot GPUs. And the cooler, the CPU cooler, you're going to mount that on the front of the case because it's a 240mm dual fan cooler, so you need that extra room on the front. And it has plenty. I think it's got 4 SSD slots. The 2 hard drives are obviously that we're using here. They're obviously mounted on the motherboard, so you don't need to worry about space for those. Yeah, so it should all fit in there nicely. So if you do choose to do this build, and you have any questions, just leave a comment below or contact me on my website, rickmedia.com. And if you're doing the build and you want to swap out for different parts, again, just leave a comment or contact me through my website, and I'll give you some advice. Alright, so that's about does it for this build, guys. Any questions or comments, leave them below, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.